Here is the thing about silence. True, absolute silence does not exist on Earth. Even in the deepest anechoic chamber, if you stand still long enough, you will hear the thumping of your own heart and the high-pitched hiss of your nervous system. But in the vacuum of space, silence is the default setting. It is the canvas upon which the universe is painted. Sound requires a medium, air, water, something to carry the wave. And out there, in the great black void between worlds, there is nothing. You could scream until your lungs collapsed, and the astronaut floating 3 feet away wouldn't hear a whisper. So, when something makes a sound in space, or rather, when something generates a vibration that we can translate into sound, you should pay very close attention, especially when that sound defies the laws of physics as we understand them, especially when that sound suggests that the ground beneath your feet isn't rock at all, but metal. Stop scrolling for a second. I want you to listen to a ghost story. But this isn't a story about haunted houses or spectral figures. This is a ghost story about gravity, geology, and a terrifying anomaly that happened on November 20th, 1969. It is a story that convinced 2 serious Soviet scientists that our moon, the celestial body that dictates our tides, stabilizes our climate, and lights our nights, is not a natural object. They believed, based on hard data, that the moon is an artificial construct, a hollowed-out planetoid steered into orbit eons ago by an intelligence far older than humanity. They called it the Spaceship Moon theory. And before you roll your eyes and click away, thinking this is just another tinfoil hat conspiracy video, I need to tell you the most unsettling part of this story. They didn't just make it up. They didn't pull it out of thin air. The evidence that led them to this conclusion is real. It sits in NASA's archives right now. The moon really did do something impossible that day in 1969. It rang. It rang like a massive hollow bell struck by a hammer, and it didn't stop ringing for almost an hour. We are going to go on a journey today, you and I. We are going to take this popular myth, the idea that the moon is hollow, and we are going to use it as a map. We are going to follow the breadcrumbs of this conspiracy, not to mock it, but to find the truth hidden behind it. Because the truth is not that the moon is an alien spaceship. The truth is actually much, much weirder than that. The truth involves a planetary collision that nearly destroyed the Earth, a rain of molten rock that lasted for centuries, and a cosmic coincidence so precise that it feels statistically impossible. But to get to that truth, we have to start in the dark. We have to go back to the moment the mystery began. We have to go back to the Apollo 12 mission, and the day we decided to bomb the moon, just to see what would happen. The year is 1969. The euphoria of Apollo 11 has faded slightly, replaced by the grim determination of routine. Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin had proven we could land. Now, the mission was to understand where we had landed. Apollo 12 was a mission of precision. Commanders Pete Conrad and Alan Bean didn't just want to land on the moon. They wanted to land on a specific target, right next to an old robotic probe called Surveyor 3. They succeeded, proving that NASA could pinpoint a landing site with terrifying accuracy. But while the astronauts were walking on the surface, collecting rocks and making jokes, a different experiment was quietly humming in the background. Before they left the lunar surface to rejoin the command module orbiting overhead, Conrad and Bean deployed a piece of equipment that looked deceptively simple. The Passive Seismic Experiment, or PSE. Think of the PSE as a high-tech ear pressed against the ground. It was a seismometer designed to detect the slightest tremor in the lunar crust. On Earth, seismometers are constantly scribbling data. Our planet is noisy. Tectonic plates grind against each other, trucks rumble down highways. Ocean waves crash against the continental shelves. The Earth is alive, geologically speaking. It hums with activity. But the Moon was supposed to be dead. It is a geologically inactive world, frozen in time. The scientists back in Houston expected the PSE to record the occasional meteorite impact, maybe a faint thermal creak as the sun rose and heated the rocks. What they got instead changed planetary science forever. The experiment began in earnest once the astronauts were safe. Conrad and Bean climbed back into the lunar module, the Intrepid, and blasted off the surface to rendezvous with the command module Yankee Clipper. Once they had transferred the crew and the cargo, the Intrepid was no longer needed. It was 1.6 tons of high-grade metal and engineering, now just dead weight. Usually in spaceflight, you discard debris into a graveyard orbit or let it burn up in an atmosphere. But the Moon has no atmosphere to burn things up, and NASA saw an opportunity. They decided to dispose of the Intrepid by crashing it. They engineered a controlled collision. They aimed the ascent stage of the lunar module at a point about 45 miles away from where they had left the seismometer. Imagine the scene. The silent gray expanse of the ocean of storms. The stark ink-black sky. And then, silently, because there is no air to carry the roar of an engine or the whistle of a falling bomb, the Intrepid comes hurtling down from the heavens. It strikes the surface at 3,800 miles per hour. The impact unleashed a kinetic force equivalent to about 1 ton of TNT. It wasn't a nuclear explosion, but it was a significant punch. In mission control, the scientists huddled around the telemetry strip charts, waiting. They expected a sharp spike, the thud of the impact, followed by a quick decay of the signal. If you hit a rock on Earth with a sledgehammer, what happens? You hear a crack, and the vibration dies, almost instantly. The energy is absorbed by the ground. If you hit a pile of sand, the energy dissipates even faster. This is what the geologists expected. They thought the Moon was a simple pile of rock and dust. But when the Intrepid hit, the needles on the seismographs didn't just jump. They went wild. And then, they stayed wild. The shockwaves from the crash didn't die out in seconds. They didn't die out in minutes. The Moon vibrated. It oscillated. The signal grew to a peak and then sustained itself, ringing and ringing and ringing. It took nearly an hour, 55 minutes to be exact, for the vibrations to fade back into the background noise. The scientists were stunned. Maurice Ewing, one of the co-chief investigators of the seismic experiment, stared at the data in disbelief. He later told a press conference it was as though one had struck a bell, say, in the belfry of a church, a single blow, and found that the reverberation from it continued for 30 minutes. The phrase, rang like a bell, was born in that moment, and it is a dangerous phrase. Because in our human experience, what kind of objects ring like bells? Hollow ones. A solid block of granite doesn't ring. A sphere of mud doesn't ring. A bell rings because it is a shell of metal engineered to trap sound waves and let them bounce back and forth, amplifying and sustaining the tone. If the Moon was ringing for an hour, did that mean the Moon was a shell? The mystery deepened with Apollo 13. Although that mission is famous for its successful failure and the safe return of the crew, it also contributed a massive data point to this enigma. The heavy third stage of the Saturn V rocket, the SIVB booster, was deliberately crashed into the Moon to test the seismometers again. This object was much heavier than the lunar module. It hit with the force of 11 tons of TNT. This time, the Moon didn't just ring for an hour. It rang for nearly 4 hours. The vibrations traveled deep, echoing through the lunar interior, refusing to die down. The seismic waves looked nothing like earthquakes. They looked like the vibrations of a tuning fork. NASA was baffled. They had no immediate explanation. The data suggested that the moon was composed of materials that transmitted energy with terrifying efficiency, far better than the Earth. And in the absence of a clear, immediate scientific explanation, the human imagination began to fill in the gaps. Enter the Soviet Union. While NASA was publicly scratching its head, trying to reconcile the data with their geological models, two members of the Soviet Academy of Sciences, Michael Vassin and Alexander Shcherbakov, were looking at the same data and coming to a radically different conclusion. In July 1970, they published an article in the Soviet digest Sputnik. The title was provocative, to say the least. Is the moon the creation of alien intelligence? This wasn't a sci-fi pulp story. This was presented as a serious hypothesis by credentialed scientists. Vassin and Shcherbakov looked at the ringing bell data, and then they looked at the moon's craters, and they began to connect dots that most astronomers refused to touch. Their logic went like this. First, the ringing. As we've established, natural planetary bodies shouldn't ring. If the moon rings like a hollow metal sphere, perhaps it is a hollow metal sphere. Second, the craters. The moon is pockmarked with billions of years of impact scars. Some of these impacts were caused by massive asteroids, rocks the size of cities slamming into the surface. Vassin and Shcherbakov argued that if the moon were just a ball of rock, these massive impacts should have created incredibly deep holes. A meteor striking a planet is like a bullet striking a block of clay. It should penetrate deep into the interior. But when you look at the moon, even the widest craters are surprisingly shallow. The crater Gagarin, for instance, is nearly 200 miles wide, but only a few miles deep. It looks less like a hole and more like a dent. The Soviet scientists proposed a startling explanation. What if the meteors weren't hitting rock? What if they were hitting a hull? They hypothesized that beneath the layer of lunar dust and rock, which they called the buffer, there lay a hardened, armored shell, an inner hull made of unknown, super-strong alloys. When a meteor struck, it would blast away the rocky covering, but shatter against the invincible armor underneath, leaving a wide, shallow scar on the surface, but failing to penetrate the interior. They went further. They looked at the chemical composition of the moon rocks brought back by Apollo. They pointed to the high quantities of titanium, chromium, and zirconium, metals that are used on Earth to harden steel and build heat-resistant plating for jet engines and spacecraft. Why, they asked, would a natural satellite have such a high concentration of these specific industrial-grade metals? To Vassin and Shcherbakov, the answer was obvious. The moon was a derelict starship. It was an ancient probe, perhaps a Noah's Ark, of a long-dead civilization that had been parked in orbit around Earth millions of years ago. Over eons, it had gathered dust and asteroid debris, camouflaging its artificial nature under a layer of natural-looking regolith. But the ringing betrayed it. The shallow craters betrayed it. The Spaceship Moon was hiding in plain sight. Now I want you to pause and sit with that idea for a moment. Imagine looking up at the moon tonight, seeing that familiar glowing orb, and realizing it's not a rock. It's a roof. It's a ceiling. It's a machine. It's a concept that triggers a very specific kind of primal fear. Megalophobia, the fear of large objects, mixed with the paranoia of being watched. This theory didn't just stay in the Soviet Union. It exploded into the West. It became a staple of late-night radio, tabloid headlines, and conspiracy forums. It resonated because it offered an answer to a question that science seemed to be fumbling. NASA was saying, we don't know why it rings yet, while the Spaceship Moon theory said, It rings because it's a hole. The human brain hates ambiguity. We prefer a scary answer to no answer at all. And let's be honest, the Cold War context helped. We were already living in a world of spies, secret weapons, and technological paranoia. The idea that the ultimate observation post was orbiting overhead, monitoring our nuclear tests and our petty wars, fit the zeitgeist of the 1970s perfectly. It was the ultimate projection of our own anxieties onto the cosmos. But here is where I need to pull you back to reality. I need to be the buzzkill, but only for a moment. The moon is not a spaceship. It is not hollow. There are no aliens living inside it, and there is no armored hull made of super titanium. We know this because we have continued to study the moon for the last 50 years. We have mapped its gravity field with exquisite precision, using the Grail satellites. We have measured the way it wobbles as it rotates. We have shot lasers at the mirrors left behind by Apollo to measure its distance to within millimeters. If the moon were hollow, its mass would be significantly lower than it is. It wouldn't have the gravitational pull to create the tides we see every day. If it were a hollow shell, the physics of its orbit would be completely different. It would wobble chaotically. It would be unstable. Furthermore, modern seismology has given us a look inside. Those same seismometers that detected the ringing eventually detected enough moonquakes to allow us to run a CT scan of the lunar interior. We now know the moon has a crust, a solid mantle, and a small, dense core. It is a differentiated planetary body, just like Earth, Mars, or Venus. So, the Soviet scientists were wrong. The conspiracy theorists are wrong. But, and this is a massive but, they were right about one thing. They were right that the moon is strange. They were right that the data didn't make sense in the context of what we thought we knew. The ringing phenomenon is real. It happened. It happens every time a meteor hits the moon. And the reason it happens is actually more fascinating than a metal hull. It has to do with the fundamental difference between the Earth and the moon. A difference that tells the violent story of how our world was made. The Earth is wet. I don't just mean the oceans. I mean the rock itself. The crust of our planet is permeated with water, fluids, and volatiles. When an earthquake happens on Earth, that energy moves through rocks that are, at a microscopic level, damp and pliable. The water acts as a damper. It absorbs the energy. It turns the vibration into heat. It muffles the sound. That's why earthquakes die out quickly. The moon, however, is dry. Bone dry. Drier than the driest desert on Earth. It is a rigid, fractured block of stone, with absolutely no fluids to dampen the vibration. So when you strike it, the energy has nowhere to go. It just bounces. It scatters back and forth through the fractured crust, echoing endlessly, trapped in a lattice of dry stone. It rings not because it is hollow, but because it is mummified. It is a dead, dry corpse of a world that cannot absorb the shock of a blow. This dryness is a clue. It is a forensic clue left at the scene of a crime that happened 4.5 billion years ago. Why is the moon so dry? Why does it lack the iron core that Earth has? Why is it so large compared to the planet it orbits? The hollow moon conspiracy was a desperate attempt to explain these anomalies with aliens. But the real explanation requires us to look back to the very beginning of the solar system, to a time before the Earth was the blue marble we know today, to a time when another planet, a world the size of Mars, a world we have named Theia, stalked the Earth in its orbit. The story of the moon is not a story of alien engineering. It is a story of cosmic violence. It is the story of a collision so massive that it vaporized two planets and forged them into one. It is the story of how the Earth and the Moon are not just neighbors, but siblings, or perhaps more accurately, mother and child, born from a rain of fire that lasted 1,000 years. This is the story we are going to tell today. We are going to dismantle the myth of the hollow moon, but we are going to keep the wonder. Because when you understand why the moon rings, why it is tidally locked to us, and why it fits perfectly over the sun during an eclipse, you realize that we are living in a universe that is far more intricate and precarious than any science fiction writer could invent. We are going to dive into the seismometers hypothesis, the idea that the Earth was once a donut-shaped cloud of vaporized rock. We are going to look at the mascons, the mysterious gravity anomalies that tugged our spacecraft out of orbit. And we are going to end with the most profound coincidence in the solar system, a geometric miracle that allowed humanity to discover the laws of the universe. This is a deep dive. We are going to be here for a while. So get comfortable. Turn off your notifications. Pour yourself a drink. We are about to leave the conspiracy theories behind and step into the hard, cold, beautiful reality of the cosmos. The moon is ringing. Let's find out why. But before we launch into the violence of the early solar system, I need you to make a commitment. This isn't a 10-minute explainer video. This is a comprehensive documentary. We are going to cover complex physics, geology, and history. I want you to stay with me until the very end, because the payoff in the final act, the revelation about the eclipse and what it means for our existence, is something you need to hear. It changes the way you look at the sky. So, if you're ready to trade a comfortable myth for a breathtaking reality, let's begin. Let's go back to the crime scene. Let's look at the fingerprints. Let's talk about Theia. The Apollo 12 astronauts left that seismometer on the surface, and for 7 years, it listened. It listened to the silence, and it listened to the violence. And every piece of data it sent back was a whisper from the past, telling us that our moon is not what it seems. It is not a spaceship. It is something far more precious. It is a mirror, reflecting our own violent history back at us. To understand the ringing, we have to understand the rock itself. And to understand the rock, we have to understand where it came from. The standard story you learned in school, that the moon formed from a collision, is true. But it is incomplete. It's like saying Rome fell. It misses the drama, the fire, and the sheer improbability of the event. The hollow moon theory relies on the idea that the moon is too weird to be natural. And they are right about the too weird part. The moon is an oddball. In the entire solar system, there is no other moon like ours. Relative to the size of its host planet, our moon is a giant. It stabilizes our axis. It creates the tides that may have allowed life to move from the oceans to the land. Without the moon, Earth might be a chaotic, wobbling mess with 10-hour days and winds that scour the surface at hundreds of miles an hour. The Soviet scientists looked at this perfect setup and saw design. They saw a spaceship parked in the perfect spot to help life evolve. It's a seductive idea. It makes us feel special. It makes us feel watched over. But science offers a different kind of awe. It offers the awe of chance, the awe of survival. The moon exists because of a cataclysm that should have destroyed the Earth, but instead saved it. So, the bell rings in the dark. The vibrations travel through the dry, shattered crust. They bounce off the small, molten core. They tell us a story of fire and ice. The conspiracy theorists heard a bell and thought artificial. The scientists heard a bell and thought dry. But both of them were hearing the same thing, the echo of Theia. In the next chapter, we are going to meet Theia. We are going to visualize the impact that created our world. We are going to see how a Mars-sized planet smashed into the proto-Earth, not just breaking it, but liquefying it. We are going to see how the moon condensed out of a hellish atmosphere of rock vapor. You think the Spaceship Moon is a cool story? Wait until you hear about the vaporized Earth. The journey is just beginning. The bell has rung. The class is in session. Welcome to the true story of the moon. The bell has rung, and the sound is echoing through the vacuum of history. When the ascent stage of the Apollo 12 lunar module, the Intrepid, smashed into the lunar surface on November 20, 1969, it struck with the force of 1 ton of TNT. It was a deliberate crash, a calibrated punch to the face of our celestial neighbor, designed to test the seismometers that astronauts Pete Conrad and Alan Bean had left behind just hours earlier. Back in Houston, the geologists and engineers leaned in, expecting a dull thud, a sharp spike on the graph, followed by a quick decay, silence returning within a minute. That is what happens on Earth. When you strike the ground here, the planet swallows the noise. But the moon didn't swallow anything. It sang. The shock waves rippled out from the impact site, traveled through the crust, and hit the seismometer. And they kept hitting it. The pen on the chart recorder scribbled furiously, not for a minute, not for 5 minutes, but for 55 minutes. The vibrations built up to a peak and then refused to die down, a long, haunting resonance that defied every model NASA had prepared. It was as if the moon were a massive church bell that had been struck by a hammer, humming in the dark, vibrating with a clarity that should be physically impossible for a solid ball of rock. Later, during Apollo 13, the heavy third stage of the Saturn V rocket was impacted into the moon, a much heavier blow. This time, the moon rang for over 3 hours. The vibrations traveled deep, echoing through the sphere, sounding out a mystery that terrified the imagination. This is where the hollow moon theory found its legs. And you have to admit, if you were standing there in mission control, watching those needles dance for an hour, you would have felt a chill crawl up your spine too. Our intuition about how physical objects behave is derived entirely from our life on Earth. On Earth, if you hit a melon, it goes thump. If you hit a hollow metal sphere, it goes ping. The moon went ping. Therefore, the intuition whispers, the moon must be a hollow metal sphere. It is a seductive line of reasoning. It led the Soviet scientists Michael Vosin and Alexander Shcherbakov to propose their infamous Spaceship Moon hypothesis in 1970. They looked at that seismic data, combined it with the strange shallowness of the lunar craters, and concluded that the moon was not a natural object at all. They suggested it was a hollowed-out planetoid, an ancient armored starship steered into orbit by a super-civilization eons ago, its interior reinforced with a hull of processed metal, its surface camouflaged with dust and rock. To them, the ringing was the sound of the hull vibrating. It is a fantastic story. It makes for incredible science fiction. But the truth is actually far more interesting, and it requires us to understand the fundamental difference between the two worlds. The reason the moon rings is not because it is an artificial spaceship. It rings because it is a ghost. To understand this, we need to talk about sponges and crystals. Think about the ground beneath your feet right now. The Earth. It feels solid, doesn't it? If you jump, you land on something hard. But geologically speaking, the Earth is a wet, squishy mess. Our planet is saturated with fluids. The crust is filled with water tables, oceans, magma chambers, and oil deposits. Even the solid rock of the mantle is somewhat plastic, moving and flowing over millions of years. When an earthquake strikes on Earth, or when we detonate a nuclear test underground. The seismic waves rush out from the source, but as they travel, they encounter resistance. They have to push through rock that is damp and heavy. The water trapped in the microscopic pores of the stones acts as a dampener. It absorbs the energy of the vibration. Imagine taking a soaking wet sponge, heavy, dripping with water, and smacking it against a table. What happens? It makes a dull, wet splat. The energy of the impact is instantly dissipated by the water and the soft structure of the sponge. The vibration dies before it can even begin. That is Earth. Earth is the wet sponge. It is excellent at killing sound. It is designed to absorb the blows, dampen the shocks, and return to stability. This is a feature of a living, breathing, wet planet. Now, imagine a wine glass made of pure, high-quality lead crystal. It is bone dry. It is rigid. The structure is perfectly aligned. If you wet your finger and run it around the rim, or if you tap it gently with a spoon, what happens? It sings. The note is clear, resonant, and it sustains. You can hear the hum linger in the air long after you have stopped touching it. Why? Because the crystal is rigid, and crucially, it is dry. There is no water inside the glass structure to absorb the energy. There is no fluid to dampen the vibration. The energy is trapped within the crystal lattice, bouncing back and forth with nowhere to go, sustaining the note until it naturally fades away from air resistance. The moon is the crystal wine glass. The seismic data from Apollo didn't prove the moon was hollow. It proved the moon was undeniably, catastrophically dry. The ringing effect is the result of a phenomenon called high seismic Q, or U high quality factor. It measures how efficiently a wave travels through a medium without losing energy. Earth has a very low Q because it is wet and geologically active. The moon has an incredibly high Q. When the Apollo module crashed, the shock waves entered the lunar surface, but unlike Earth, there was no water to stop them. The moon's crust is not just dry in the sense of a desert. It is chemically desiccated. There is almost zero volatile content in the rocks. No water in the pores. No oil. No natural gas. Just stone. Furthermore, the top layer of the moon is pulverized. Billions of years of meteorite impacts have shattered the upper crust into a chaotic layer of rubble and dust called the megaregolith. When the seismic waves hit this fractured, dry layer, they don't just travel in a straight line. They scatter. They bounce off every crack, every fracture, every shatter point in the rock. Because there is no water to kill the energy, the waves just keep bouncing. They ricochet through the crust, like a million ping-pong balls dropped in a stone room, echoing back and forth, scattering and rescattering, keeping the vibration alive for an hour or more. The ringing was the sound of energy trapped in a fractured, bone-dry prison. It was the sound of a world that has been baked until all the moisture was gone. This brings us to a crucial pause in our investigation, a moment where I want you to check your own instincts against the hard data we just uncovered. I want you to imagine you are sitting at that console in Houston in 1969. You are tired, running on coffee and adrenaline. You see the needle vibrating. You know that on Earth, vibrations stop in 60 seconds. Here, they are going for 60 minutes. Be honest with yourself. Does your mind jump to aliens, or does it jump to geophysics? It is human nature to look for agency in the chaos. We want the anomaly to be a signal. We want the weirdness to be a message. The idea of a hollow spaceship is comforting in a strange way because it implies intelligence. It implies that someone built this. It implies that the universe is watching us. But the alternative, the idea that the moon is just a dead, dry rock, feels disappointing at first. It feels boring. Oh, it's just dry rocks? That's it? But I want you to push past that disappointment. I want you to look closer at what that dryness actually implies. Because if you really think about it, the dry rock explanation is infinitely more terrifying and majestic than the spaceship explanation. Think about what it takes to make a world this dry. Earth and the Moon, formed in the same neighborhood of the solar system. They are made of the same basic stuff. We know this from the oxygen isotopes, which we will get to later. If they were made of the same stuff, in the same place, they should be equally wet. Earth is a water world, covered in blue oceans, drifting under white clouds. Life teems in every drop. So, how did the Moon lose its water? How did it become so perfectly, structurally dry that it rings like a bell? You cannot get a rock that dry by just leaving it in the sun. You cannot get it that dry by simple evaporation. To create a world as desiccated as the Moon, you have to subject it to a violence that is almost beyond comprehension. You have to heat the rock until it isn't just melted, but vaporized. You have to boil the world. The ringing of the bell is not a sign of construction, it is a scar. It is the acoustic signature of a trauma so profound that it stripped an entire world of its volatiles. The Spaceship Moon theory tries to tell us that the Moon is a machine, but the seismic data tells us the Moon is a corpse. It is a fossilized remnant of a cataclysm. The ringing is the death knell of a planet that was born in fire. This fundamentally changes how we view the hollow moon myth. The conspiracy theorists were right to identify that the Moon is strange. They were right to say that it doesn't behave like a normal planet. A normal planet should thud. A normal planet should have water in its crust. A normal planet should dampen vibration. The Moon is not a normal planet. It is an anomaly. But it is an anomaly of physics, not of engineering. When the Apollo astronauts stood on the surface, they were standing on the wreckage of a planetary collision. The dust on their boots, the gray powder that clung to everything, was the fallout from a cosmic accident. The reason the Moon is so light, the reason it lacks the heavy iron core of the Earth, which we will explore next, and the reason it rings like a crystal, are all connected to this singular event. The hollow moon idea relies on the premise that the Moon is too light to be solid. They argue that because the Moon's density is only 3.34 grams per cubic centimeter, while Earth's is 5.5 grams, the Moon must be empty inside. This is the other pillar of the conspiracy. Where is the mass? They ask. If it's solid rock, why is it so light? Again, the answer leads us away from aliens and toward the weirder truth. The Moon isn't light because it's hollow. It's light because it is missing its heart. Planets like Earth, Mars, and Venus are differentiated. They have a heavy iron core in the center, a mantle of rock around it, and a thin crust on top. The iron core is what makes them dense. It's what gives Earth its magnetic field. It's what makes the compass point north. The Moon has a core, but it is tiny, almost pathetic by planetary standards. It is a small iron-rich nugget, barely 20% of the Moon's radius, whereas Earth's core is about 50% of its radius. The rest of the Moon is rock. It is almost entirely mantle and crust. Why? Why would a celestial body form without a proper heart? Why is it just a ball of stone with no heavy metal to weigh it down? If the Moon formed on its own, spinning out of the solar nebula alongside Earth, it should have pulled in the same ratio of iron and heavy metals. It should be a mini-Earth, dense and magnetic. But it's not. It is a ball of light rock. This density disparity, combined with the seismic ringing, paints a picture that points to one specific, horrifying conclusion. The Moon was not formed with the Earth. It was born from the Earth. Imagine the scene not as a construction project by aliens, but as a crime scene. The body is the moon. The cause of death was blunt force trauma. The evidence is the missing iron and the shattered dry crust. If you take a planet like Earth, which has already formed its iron core, and you smash it with another planet, you don't just break it, you splash it. The heavy iron cores of the two planets merge and sink to the center of the larger body, the Earth. But the lighter outer layers, the rock, the mantle, the crust, are thrown out into space. They form a ring of debris, a ring of hot, dry rock. And from that ring, a new world condenses. A world made of Earth's outer layers. A world with no iron core, because the iron stayed home. A world with no water, because the heat of the impact boiled it all away. The moon rings because it is made of the Earth's own flesh, stripped of its blood and bones, baked in the vacuum, and left to cool in the silence. This is why the hollow moon theory is a Trojan horse for the truth. It asks the right questions. Why does it ring? Why is it light? Why is it so big compared to the Earth? The answers don't lead to a secret base on the dark side. They lead to the giant impact hypothesis. They lead to Theia. But before we can fully visualize that collision, there is one more piece of the puzzle we need to address. We have talked about the ringing. We have talked about the density. But there is something else about the moon that fueled the artificial theory. Something that made the early space probes veer off course. Something that suggested that, while the moon might be light overall, there were heavy, massive lumps hidden beneath its skin. The conspiracy theorists called them machinery. The scientists call them mascons. When NASA began orbiting the moon in preparation for Apollo, they noticed something disturbing. The spacecraft were not orbiting smoothly. They would dip and bob. As they passed over certain large craters, the dark seas or Maria, the spacecraft would speed up and drop in altitude, pulled down by an invisible hand. Then, as they passed the crater, they would slow down and drift back up. It was as if there were massive weights buried under the lunar surface, altering the gravity field. To the paranoid mind, these gravity anomalies were proof of internal structures, power plants, gravity generators, storage bays for the fleet. To the curious investigator, they are the bruises left by the bombardment. The mascons, short for mass concentrations, are regions where the lunar crust is thinner and dense, solidified lava has pooled in the depressions created by massive asteroid impacts. Because the moon is so rigid, so crystal-like, it holds these heavy loads without sagging. On Earth, the heavy lava would sink into the soft, warm mantle, equalizing the gravity. On the moon, the cold, hard rock holds the weight up, creating a permanent gravitational lump. These mascons are the fingerprints of the violence the moon has endured. They tell us that after the moon formed, after it cooled, and became a dry, ringing bell, it was pummeled. It was struck by asteroids that punched through its crust, causing it to bleed lava from the inside. That lava pooled and froze, creating the man in the moon face we see today. So, we have a world that rings like a bell because it is dry. We have a world that is light because it is missing its core. We have a world that is lumpy with gravity because it is frozen solid. Every single anomaly that the hollow moon theory cites as proof of aliens is actually proof of a specific, violent history. The moon is a time capsule. It preserves the conditions of the early solar system in a way that Earth never could. Earth recycles its crust. Earth heals its wounds with water and tectonics. Earth forgets. The moon remembers. It remembers the heat. It remembers the dryness. It remembers the impact that nearly ended everything. And this brings us back to the central irony of our story. The Apollo 12 astronauts crashed their ship into the moon to see what would happen. They expected a thud. They got a bell. They accidentally stumbled upon the key to unlocking the origin of the Earth-Moon system. If the moon had gone thud, it would have meant it was wet. It would have meant it was just another planet, formed in the cold dark, capturing some ice, evolving like Earth. But the ping changed everything. The ping meant that this world had been through the fire. It meant that the moon is not a stranger. It is not a visitor. It is not a spaceship. It is a piece of us. The ringing tells us that the moon is the calcified echo of Earth's own violent childhood. It is a mirror held up to our past, showing us a version of our planet that was stripped, burned, and frozen. So, the next time you look up at the moon and wonder if it's hollow, remember the sponge and the crystal. Remember the wet, living Earth that absorbs the blows. And remember the dry, dead moon that remembers them forever. But the story doesn't end with the ringing. The ringing is just the symptom. The disease, the event, was the collision itself. We know the moon is dry. We know it is light. We know it is made of Earth stuff. But how exactly did the collision happen? How do you smash two planets together and get a moon instead of just a debris field? For years, scientists thought they had it figured out. They called it the glancing blow. A clean hit. Theia hits Earth, sprays some rocks, and the moon forms. Simple, elegant. But there was a problem. The math didn't quite work, and the chemistry really didn't work. If Theia was a separate planet, the moon should look like Theia. But as we've hinted, the moon looks like Earth, exactly like Earth. To solve this, we have to go beyond the simple collision. We have to go to a new theory. A theory that is terrifyingly violent. A theory that suggests that, for a brief moment in time, the Earth didn't exist. The moon didn't exist. There was only the synestia. We are done with the ringing bell. Now, we must look into the fire that cast it. We are going to travel back 4.5 billion years. We are going to watch a Mars-sized world fall out of the sky. And we are going to watch the Earth turn into a donut of vaporized rock. The bell has stopped ringing. The curtain is rising on the main event. You thought the spaceship was a wild idea? You aren't ready for the truth, but you will be. Let's go back to the beginning. Before the sponge, before the crystal. Let's go back to the impact. The year is negative 4.5 billion. Forget the blue marble you know. Forget the oceans, the forests, the white clouds drifting lazily over the Pacific. If you were to stand on the surface of the Earth at this moment in time, you would not be standing on solid ground. You would be standing on a thin black crust of cooling basalt, floating precariously over a mantle that is churning like a pot of boiling soup. The sky is not blue. It is a bruised, angry orange, choked with carbon dioxide and sulfur. There is no moon in the sky. The nights are pitch black, save for the glowing fissures in the ground, where the magma bleeds through. The days are short. The planet is spinning so fast that a day lasts only a few hours. It is a lonely, toxic, hellish world. But it is not alone for long. Out in the dark, silent drift of the early solar system, something is coming. It has been stalking the Earth for millions of years, sharing a similar orbit, dancing a dangerous gravitational waltz. It is a planet. We call it Theia, named after the Greek titan who gave birth to the moon goddess Selene. Theia is not an asteroid. It is not a stray rock. It is a world. It is roughly the size of Mars. Imagine looking up into that toxic orange sky and seeing a second planet growing larger every night. At first, it's just a bright star, then a disk, then a looming sphere that swallows the horizon. It would have been beautiful if there had been anyone there to see it. When we talk about the giant impact hypothesis, the words feel sterile. They feel like textbook diagrams, two clean billiard balls clacking together in a physics simulation. But you need to understand the violence of this event. This was not a clack. This was the single most energetic event in the history of our world. It was a collision so catastrophic that it nearly erased the Earth from existence. When Theia hit, it didn't just crash into the surface. At this scale, rock behaves like fluid. Theia slammed into the proto-Earth at a speed of nearly 10 miles per second. That's 25,000 miles per hour. The energy released was equivalent to trillions of nuclear arsenals detonating simultaneously. In a fraction of a second, Theia was gone. It didn't break apart, it liquefied. The shockwave raced through the Earth, melting the entire planet down to its core. The impact was so violent that it blasted a massive portion of the Earth's crust and mantle out into space. But here is where the story usually stops in high school science class. We are told that this debris formed a ring, and that ring clumped together to form the moon. And for decades, that was the story. It was neat. It was tidy. It explained why the moon is there. It explained why the Earth spins the way it does. But there was a problem that was sitting inside a vault in Houston, Texas, a problem locked inside the gray rocks that Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin brought home in 1969. This brings us to the cosmic paternity test. When you look at the planets in our solar system, each one has a unique chemical fingerprint. We call this an isotopic signature. Specifically, we look at oxygen isotopes. Oxygen comes in different flavors. Oxygen 16, oxygen 17, oxygen 18. The ratio of these flavors is determined by where a planet formed in the solar nebula. Mars has a specific ratio. Venus has a specific ratio. Meteorites from the asteroid belt have their own specific ratios. It's like a DNA test. If you pick up a rock from Mars, a geochemist can analyze its oxygen isotopes and tell you with absolute certainty, this is not from Earth. So, when scientists first analyzed the Apollo moon rocks, they expected to see Theia's fingerprint. According to the standard giant impact physics, the moon should be made mostly of Theia. About 60% to 80% of the moon's material should have come from the impactor, and only a little bit from Earth. Therefore, the moon's isotopic DNA should look like a mix. It should look different from Earth. They ran the tests. They checked the machines. They thought they made a mistake, so they ran them again. The results were impossible. The oxygen isotope ratio of the moon was not similar to Earth. It was identical. To within 5 parts per million, the moon is chemically indistinguishable from the Earth. If you hold a piece of the moon in one hand and a piece of the Earth's mantle in the other, chemically, they are the same rock. This sent a panic through the scientific community. It was called the isotopic crisis. How could a Mars-sized planet smash into us, create a moon, and leave absolutely zero trace of itself? Where did Theia go? Did she miss? Did she barely grace us? For years, conspiracy theorists pointed to this and said, aha, the moon is artificial. It's a copy. It's a construct. But the truth, as we promised, is weirder. The answer came recently, proposed by planetary scientists Simon Locke and Sarah Stewart. They ran the simulations again, but this time, they cranked up the violence. They suggested that our mental image of 2 billiard balls hitting each other was wrong. The impact wasn't just a collision, it was a merger. They proposed that the impact was so energetic, so hot, and so fast that it didn't just melt the Earth and Theia, it vaporized them. Imagine temperatures reaching tens of thousands of degrees. Rock doesn't just melt into lava. At that temperature, it boils into gas. The theory suggests that Theia and the Earth's outer layers were instantly turned into a massive spinning cloud of vaporized rock. This cloud was so hot and spun so fast that it puffed out into a shape that looked like a giant glowing donut. They called this structure a synestia. In a synestia, there is no surface, there is no Earth and Moon. There is only a continuous fluid of supercritical rock vapor spinning wildly in the vacuum. Theia didn't disappear. She was thoroughly mixed into the Earth. The two bodies became one homogenized soup of vapor. The isotopes mixed perfectly, like stirring milk into coffee, until you can no longer tell which molecule came from the jug and which came from the mug. Inside this hellish burning donut, the Earth began to reform at the center. But out on the edges, in the cooling rain of molten rock, falling from the vapor cloud, small droplets began to stick together. They grew into clumps. The clumps grew into moonlets, and the moonlets coalesced into the moon. This is why the moon is flesh of our flesh. It is not a stranger that we captured. It is not a visitor. It is a piece of us. The moon is composed of the vaporized remains of the Earth's own mantle, stripped away in a moment of cosmic trauma, mixed with the blood of Theia, and cast out into the cold. This explains everything that the hollow moon theorists find so suspicious. Remember the density issue. They say the moon is too light, that it must be hollow, because it lacks a heavy iron core. They are right about the data, but wrong about the conclusion. The moon lacks a massive iron core, not because it was built by aliens, but because the iron from Theia and the iron from Earth sank to the center of the synestia to form Earth's massive core. The moon formed from the outer vapor, the stone, the silica, the lighter elements. The moon is the Earth's lost crust, coalesced into a sphere. It is a stone planet, quite literally. And this brings us to the ringing. I want to pause here for a moment. I want you to really process what we've just walked through. We often look up at the moon and see it as a peaceful, romantic nightlight. We write poems about it. We project our dreams onto it. But the story I just told you is one of unimaginable violence. I have a question for you, and I want you to be honest in the comments below. When you look at the moon tonight, does knowing this origin story change how you feel about it? Does it feel less magical, knowing it's just a ball of cooled debris? Or does it feel more profound, knowing that when you look up, you are literally looking at a piece of the Earth itself, a ghost of our own planet's violent past? Is it a scar, or is it a sibling? Let me know what you think. The violence of the synestia explains the mystery that started this entire investigation. The ringing bell. Remember the Apollo 12 experiment? The moon rang for an hour because the seismic waves didn't stop. On Earth, if you hit the ground with a hammer, the vibration dies out quickly. Why? Because Earth is wet. Water is everywhere. It's in the oceans, yes, but it's also trapped in the microscopic pores of the rocks beneath your feet. Liquid water and hydrated minerals act like a sponge. They absorb energy. They dampen vibrations. But the moon was born in a fire that reached thousands of degrees. It was born from vapor. In that kind of heat, volatile elements like water don't stand a chance. They boil off. They escape into space. As the moon condensed from that synestia cloud, it formed as a bone-dry world. The rocks on the moon are more parched than the driest desert sand on Earth. There is no water trapped in the crystal lattice of the lunar crust to dampen the shockwaves. So when the Apollo module crashed into the surface, the energy didn't get absorbed. It just kept going. It bounced back and forth through the shattered, dry bedrock, pinging around like a sound wave in a cathedral. It wasn't ringing because it was a hollow metal hull. It was ringing because it is a solid, desiccated stone that has been baked in the most intense oven the solar system could provide. The hollow moon theory was a misinterpretation of a miracle. The truth isn't that the moon is an alien spaceship. The truth is that the moon is a dry, fossilized echo of the Earth's own creation. This realization changes the dynamic of our investigation. We aren't looking at an artificial object. We are looking at a partner that sacrificed everything, its water, its atmosphere, its iron heart, to become what it is today. But the weirdness doesn't stop at the formation. If the moon were just a ball of rock that formed from the Earth, that would be a cool story. But the universe wasn't done with the coincidences. As the moon cooled and solidified, it didn't just sit there. It began to move. It began to interact with the Earth in a way that defies statistical probability. You see, when the moon first formed from the debris of the synestia, it was much closer to Earth than it is now. It loomed massive in the sky, orbiting fiercely, raising tides of molten rock on the cooling Earth. But over billions of years, it has been drifting away, inch by inch, year by year. And this brings us to the present day, to the moment you and I are alive. We exist in a sliver of time that is statistically negligible. The universe is 13.8 billion years old. The Earth is 4.5 billion years old. Humans have been writing things down for about 5,000 years, and yet we happen to be alive at the exact moment to witness a geometric impossibility. The conspiracy theorists love to talk about math. They love to talk about numbers that line up too perfectly, and usually they are grasping at straws. But there is one number, one ratio, that you cannot debunk. It is a number that has made astronomers scratch their heads for centuries. It is the number 400. The moon is a strange object. It is absurdly large for a planet of our size. Mars has two tiny, pathetic moons that are basically captured potatoes. Jupiter and Saturn have massive moons, but Jupiter and Saturn are gas giants with immense gravity. Earth is a small, rocky world, yet we have a moon that is 1/4 the size of our planet. This double planet system is unique in the solar system. But the size isn't the weirdest part. The weirdest part is the perspective. The sun is a monster. It is 400 times wider than the moon. If you put them side by side, the moon would be a speck of dust against a basketball. But the sun is also, by a sheer roll of the cosmic dice, exactly 400 times farther away from Earth than the moon is. 400 times larger. 400 times farther. Do the math. When you divide the size by the distance, the angular size, the amount of sky they take up as viewed from Earth is identical. This means that to an observer standing on Earth, the moon and the sun appear to be the exact same size, not roughly. Exactly. This is why we have total solar eclipses. If the moon were 10% smaller, it would never cover the sun. We would only ever see a ring of fire. If the moon were 10% larger, it would block the sun entirely, and we would never see the solar corona, the wispy, ghost-like atmosphere of the sun that reveals itself only during totality. But it isn't smaller, and it isn't larger. It is perfect. It fits over the face of the sun like a lens cap. It is a fit so precise that you can see the solar flares dancing around the edges of the lunar mountains. Now, a skeptic will tell you this is just a coincidence, and they are right. It is a temporal coincidence. Millions of years ago, the moon was closer, and it would have blotted out the sun completely. In millions of years, it will drift too far away, and total eclipses will become impossible. We just happen to be living in the Goldilocks era. But this coincidence didn't just give us a pretty light show. This coincidence changed the course of human history. It changed our understanding of the universe, because without this perfect fit, we might still be living in the dark ages of physics. The hollow moon conspiracy relies on the idea that aliens placed the moon there to watch us. That is silly. But what actually happened is far more elegant. The moon wasn't placed there to watch us. The moon was placed there so that we could watch the universe. Let me take you back to 1919, to a world recovering from the First World War, to a man named Albert Einstein. Einstein had a crazy idea. He had proposed a new theory of gravity called general relativity. He claimed that space itself was like a fabric, and that massive objects like the sun could bend that fabric, causing light to curve. It was a revolutionary thought. It meant that Newton was wrong. It meant that the universe was not a rigid grid, but a flexible, warping ocean of space-time. But there was a catch. He couldn't prove it. The math was sound, but the effect was tiny. The only thing massive enough to bend light visibly was the sun. To prove his theory, he needed to photograph stars located directly behind the sun and see if their position shifted. But you can't see stars when the sun is out. The sun is too bright. The glare wipes everything out. Einstein was stuck. His theory was just a piece of paper. He needed the sun to be turned off. But he needed it to be turned off while it was still high in the sky. Right in the middle of the star field, he needed to measure. He needed a perfect eclipse. He needed an object that could block the blinding disk of the sun perfectly, without blocking the stars right next to it. He needed the moon. On May 29, 1919, the universe conspired to help him. A total solar eclipse passed over the Atlantic. Sir Arthur Eddington, a British astronomer, traveled to the island of Principe off the coast of Africa. He set up his telescopes and waited for the moon to do its work. As the moon slid into place, darkness fell. The birds stopped singing. The temperature dropped. And for a few precious minutes, the moon covered the sun with that impossible 400-to-1 precision. The glare vanished. The corona flared into view. And there, right next to the blackened sun, the stars appeared. Eddington snapped his photos. When he analyzed them later, he found that the stars weren't where they were supposed to be. They had moved. The sun's gravity had bent their light, exactly as Einstein had predicted. The headline in the New York Times read, "Lights all askew in the heavens." Humanity had unlocked the code of the cosmos. We discovered that space is curved. We discovered the rules that would eventually give us GPS, satellite communication, and black hole physics. And we did it because the moon was exactly where it needed to be, exactly the size it needed to be. If the moon had been a little smaller, the glare would have blinded the telescopes. If the moon had been a little bigger, it would have blocked the stars Einstein needed to measure. The hollow moon theorists ask, what are the odds? They ask it with suspicion. They imply that someone built it this way. But the reality is that the moon is a tool. It is a scientific instrument provided by nature. It is a skeleton key that allowed a young, curious species to unlock the door to the structure of reality. So we have a moon that is born from our own flesh, forged in a donut of fire, dried out to ring like a bell, and positioned with mathematical perfection to teach us how gravity works. But the story isn't over. Because the moon didn't just help us discover gravity, it is gravity. While we look up at the moon and marvel at its geometry, the moon is looking down at us and flexing its muscles. We tend to think of gravity as a one-way street. Earth holds the moon in orbit. But gravity is a conversation. The moon pulls back. And this pull is not gentle. If you could see gravity, you would see the moon digging its fingers into the Earth's crust. You would see it dragging the oceans across the planet, creating the tides that allowed life to move from the sea to the land. But it does something else, something terrifying. It acts as a brake. The moon is stealing our energy. It is stealing our spin. Every time the tide crashes against a continent, the friction slows the Earth's rotation down, just a tiny bit. Billions of years ago, a day on Earth was 6 hours long. Today, thanks to the moon, it is 24. But the moon paid a heavy price for this interaction. The Earth is much bigger than the moon, so Earth's gravity won the tug-of-war long ago. Have you ever wondered why you see the man in the moon? Why you always see the same craters, the same dark seas, the same face looking down at you? The moon spins, but it spins exactly once every time it orbits the Earth. It is tidally locked. This sounds like a dry astronomical term. But think about what it means physically. It means that eons ago, the Earth grabbed the moon and broke its rotation. It twisted the moon until it stopped turning independently. It forced the moon to stare at us, unblinking forever. The dark side of the moon is a misnomer. All sides of the moon get sunlight. But there is a far side, a side that no human eye had ever seen until we sent spaceships around to look, a side that is forever turned away from its mother planet. The conspiracy theorists saw this locked face and screamed, "Surveillance!" They said the moon doesn't rotate, so the aliens can hide their bases on the back. But the truth is simpler and sadder. The moon doesn't rotate because it is tethered to us. It is locked in a gravitational embrace that is so strong it literally deformed the shape of the moon, stretching it slightly like a football pointing towards Earth. We are dancing with a corpse that we killed, a corpse that we formed from our own body, burned in a synestia, stripped of its water, and then locked in an eternal stare. And yet, without this corpse, we would not be here. Without the moon to stabilize our tilt, the Earth would wobble chaotically. The seasons would be violent and unpredictable. The climate would swing from boiling to freezing in centuries, preventing the evolution of complex life. We would be just another dead rock. The Spaceship Moon theory tries to make the moon special by making it artificial. But the scientific truth proves that the moon is special because it is natural, yet statistically miraculous. It is the anchor that holds our climate steady. It is the shield that took the asteroid hits that might have wiped us out. It is the lens that showed us relativity. It is the flesh of our flesh, the bone of our bone. The astronauts who crashed their module into the surface were right to be spooked. The moon rang like a bell because it is a tombstone for the world that existed before. But as we prepare to leave the moon and look further out into the solar system, we have to ask one final question. We have debunked the hollow spaceship. We have explained the ringing. We have explained the isotopes. But there is one thing left, the weirdest anomaly of all. The one thing the conspiracy theorists got right, even if they didn't know why. The moon is watching us, not with cameras, not with alien eyes, but with gravity. And hidden beneath those dark, flat seas, the Maria that form the face of the man in the moon, there is something buried, something heavy, something that pulls on our spacecraft when they fly over. They are called mascons, mass concentrations, and if you thought the surface was strange, wait until you see what lies beneath the skin, because while the moon isn't a spaceship, it is hiding something under the floorboards. And that is where we go next. If you were to strip away the darkness of space and look at the moon not with your eyes, but with a gravitational lens, the familiar face of our celestial neighbor would vanish. The soothing, pale lantern that has guided sailors and inspired poets for millennia would dissolve. In its place, you would see something jagged, uneven, and deeply unsettled. You would see a bruised and battered world, a sphere that is not truly a sphere, but a lopsided, warped object that defies the simple elegance of a perfect circle. When we look up at the moon, we see a static, dead rock. We see a silent partner that keeps its distance, passively reflecting the sun's light. But this is a lie born of distance. The moon is not passive. It is aggressive. It is not uniform. It is a chaotic mess of frozen violence. And nowhere is this violence more evident or more dangerous to human exploration than in the invisible anomalies buried deep beneath its skin. We call them mascons, short for mass concentrations. To understand them and to understand why they completely shatter the hollow moon hypothesis, we have to go back to the years immediately preceding the Apollo landings. We have to go back to a time when NASA engineers were sweating over slide rules and mainframes, trying to solve a math problem that refused to balance. In the mid-1960s, before a human boot ever touched the lunar regolith, NASA sent a series of robotic scouts called the lunar orbiters. Their mission was ostensibly simple: fly around the moon, take high-resolution photographs of potential landing sites, and map the surface. It was a cartography mission, but it quickly turned into a physics nightmare. The mission planners had calculated the orbits of these spacecraft with Newtonian precision. In the vacuum of space, without an atmosphere to cause drag, an orbit should be a perfect, predictable ellipse. If you tell a spacecraft to fly at a certain altitude and speed, it should stay there, ticking like a cosmic clock. But the lunar orbiters didn't behave. They drifted. As they passed over certain regions of the moon, specifically the large, dark circular plains we call maria or seas, the spacecraft would suddenly lurch. They would dip, accelerating downward toward the surface, and then, just as inexplicably, pop back up as they cleared the area. It was as if an invisible hand was reaching up from the lunar surface, grabbing the spacecraft, yanking it down, and then releasing it. Over the course of a few weeks, these tiny deviations added up. A spacecraft that was supposed to be in a stable circular orbit would find itself in a wobbly, deteriorating path that looked more like a crumpled wire than a smooth ring. If left unchecked, these orbits would degrade so severely that the multi-million-dollar probes would eventually crash into the lunar surface. The engineers at JPL were baffled. The math of gravity is supposed to be universal. A planet or a moon attracts an object based on its mass. If the moon were a uniform ball of rock, or, as the conspiracy theorists suggest, a hollow shell, the gravity should be consistent across the entire surface. You shouldn't feel heavier in one spot and lighter in another. But the data was undeniable. The moon was lumpy, not just in terms of mountains and valleys, but in terms of gravity itself. This brings us to the metaphor that best explains the weirder truth of our satellite. Imagine a beautiful, heavy velvet curtain hanging in a theater. From the audience, it looks smooth, uniform, and perfectly draped. It has a consistent shape. But imagine that someone has secretly taken heavy lead weights, dense iron fishing sinkers, and sewn them into the lining of the hem at random intervals. From the outside, you can't see the weights. The fabric hides them. But if you were to run your hand along the bottom of the curtain, or if you were to try and blow the curtain with a fan, those weighted sections would behave differently. They would resist the wind. They would pull the fabric down tight. They would distort the shape of the entire drape, creating tension points where the fabric is stretched and stressed. The moon is that curtain, and the mascons are the lead weights sewn into its lining. This discovery, led by Paul Mueller and William Sjogren at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in 1968, changed everything we thought we knew about the moon's interior. They realized that the moon's gravity field was a minefield. There were regions of the lunar crust that were incredibly, impossibly dense, regions with so much extra mass that they created a gravitational high strong enough to physically tug a spacecraft out of the sky. But here is where the story pivots from a navigation problem to a geological detective story. What are these weights? If the moon is supposed to be a mixture of crust and mantle rock, why are there specific spots that are so much heavier than everything else? And why are they located exactly where they are? To answer this, we have to look at the face of the man in the moon. When you look up at the full moon, you see the bright white highlands and the dark gray spots. Ancient astronomers thought these dark spots were oceans of liquid water, which is why they named them Maria, Latin for seas. We have the Mare Tranquillitatis, Sea of Tranquility, the Mare Imbrium, Sea of Rains, the Mare Serenitatis, Sea of Serenity. We now know they aren't water. They are rock. But they are not just any rock. They are the scars of an apocalypse. Billions of years ago, during a chaotic period of the solar system known as the Late Heavy Bombardment, the moon was assaulted. Massive asteroids, some the size of small states, slammed into the young lunar surface. These weren't just crater-making events. They were planet-shattering impacts. The asteroids hit with such kinetic energy that they didn't just make a dent. They punched a hole right through the moon's solid crust and exposed the bleeding, molten mantle beneath. Imagine the violence of that moment. An asteroid 50 miles wide strikes the surface. The crust is vaporized instantly. A crater hundreds of miles wide opens up, a gaping wound in the lunar flesh. But the moon was younger then, and its interior was still hot. Over the next several million years, molten lava from the moon's interior rose up through the fractures in the floor of these massive craters. The lava welled up, filling the bowl of the crater, like water filling a bathtub. It created a lake of liquid basalt, iron-rich, heavy volcanic rock. As this lava lake cooled, it solidified into a massive, dense plate of basalt. But here is the physics twist that creates the mascon. Basalt is significantly denser than the surrounding lunar highland rock. It's heavy, and as it cooled, it didn't just sit there, it piled up. In some cases, the crust actually bowed downward under the weight of this massive lava sea, allowing even more lava to flow in on top of it. The result is a bullseye structure buried beneath the surface. You have the original crater, and inside it, a thick, heavy plug of solidified iron-rich lava. A massive hidden weight. When a spacecraft like Apollo flies over the Mare Imbrium, it is flying over one of these hidden weights. The extra mass of that solidified lava lake reaches up and pulls on the ship with slightly more gravitational force than the surrounding rock. It accelerates the ship. As the ship passes the center of the mascon, the gravity pulls it back, slowing it down. This constant push and pull plays havoc with orbital mechanics. This is the weirder truth. The conspiracy theorists want you to believe the moon is hollow, a light, empty shell. The reality is that in these specific locations, the moon is hyperdense. It is the exact opposite of hollow. It is so packed with heavy material that it breaks the rules of orbital flight. Before we descend further into why this terrified the Apollo astronauts, I want you to pause for a moment. I want you to actually look at the moon, whether it's out your window right now or just in your mind's eye. When you look at those dark patches on the moon, the face of the man in the moon, what do you feel? Do you see them as peaceful, silent seas? Or, now that you know what lies beneath, do you feel the weight of them? It's strange to think that the features we define as the man in the moon are actually gravitational traps. I want to challenge you. Next time you see the moon, Try to visualize it not as a flat picture, but as a topographical map of gravity. Imagine those dark spots as heavy lead weights pulling down on the fabric of space. Does knowing that the moon is lumpy with gravity change the way you see its beauty? Does it make it feel more real or more alien? Let me know in the comments if you think the perfect sphere of the moon is more comforting than the lumpy gravitational minefield we actually have. Because personally, I think the flaws make it fascinating. The flaws are indeed fascinating, but for the crews of Apollo, they were terrifying. This wasn't just academic trivia. This was a matter of life and death. When Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin were descending toward the lunar surface in the Eagle on July 20, 1969, the mascons came into play in a very real way. The onboard guidance computer was navigating based on a model of the moon's gravity. But that model wasn't perfect. As the lunar module orbited and then began its descent, the mascons tugged on it. They pulled the Eagle slightly off course. It wasn't a huge amount, just a tiny acceleration here, a little drag there. But at 3,000 miles per hour, a tiny deviation compounds quickly. As Armstrong looked out the triangular window of the LEM, scanning the surface for his landmarks, he realized something was wrong. The landmarks were passing by too early. The computer was guiding them to a landing site that was miles downrange from where they had planned to be. They were long. The mascons had pulled them past their target. Instead of a smooth, flat plane, Armstrong saw the computer was taking them directly into a field of boulders the size of Volkswagens surrounding a massive crater. The hidden weights of the moon had effectively thrown the Eagle off balance, tossing it toward a disaster. We all know the story of what happened next. Armstrong took manual control, flew the Eagle like a helicopter, and skimmed over the crater to find a safe spot, landing with only seconds of fuel remaining. But few people realized that the reason he tried to take control, the reason they were in that boulder field in the first place, was because of the moon's lumpy gravity. The moon was actively fighting the landing. This reality paints a picture of the moon that is far more compelling than any spaceship theory. A spaceship is built, it is engineered, it is precise. But the moon is a graveyard of impacts. It is a record of violence. The mascons are the bruises left behind by the beatings the moon took for us. Think about that. The Earth and moon occupy the same neighborhood in the solar system. If the moon was getting hammered by state-sized asteroids 3.9 billion years ago, Earth was getting hit too. But Earth has wind, rain, tectonic plates, and erosion. Earth heals its wounds. We grind down our craters, bury them, recycle them into the mantle. We hide our history. The moon cannot heal. It has no wind to erode the mountains, no water to fill the lakes, no tectonics to recycle the crust. It is a witness. It holds onto its scars forever. The mare imbrium, that massive dark eye on the upper left of the moon's face, is a wound that never closed. The lava welled up to bandage it, but the scar remains dense and heavy, pulling on anything that dares to get close. This completely dismantles the logic of the hollow moon theory, but it does so by validating the feeling that the conspiracy theorists have. They feel that the moon is strange. They are right. They feel that the moon behaves in ways that standard physics models don't seem to explain intuitively. They are right. The ringing bell? That's because the rock is fractured and dry, shattered by these very impacts. The orbital anomalies? That's because of the lava that filled the impacts. The moon is not a hollow construct. It is a super-dense, shattered relic. It is a solid object that has been beaten so hard, it rings, and bruised so deeply, it pulls ships out of the sky. And this leads us to an even deeper realization about the relationship between our planet and its satellite. We often think of the moon as a child of the Earth, a piece of us that broke off. And in many ways, as we discussed with the isotopes, that is true. But the mascons remind us that the moon is also a shield. Every one of those massive gravity wells, every one of those solidified lava seas, represents an impact that didn't hit Earth. Or, if it did, it represents an era of violence that both worlds shared. The moon is the keeper of the memories that Earth has chosen to forget. It is the hard drive backup of the solar system's history, stored in a cold, vacuum-sealed server room. But there is a darker side to this lumpiness. The mascons didn't just threaten Apollo. They make the moon an inherently unstable place to orbit. If you were to park a satellite around Earth, it could stay there for centuries with very little fuel. But around the moon, the mascons destabilize low lunar orbits. Most satellites placed in low orbit around the moon will eventually crash into the surface if they don't burn fuel to correct their path. The moon doesn't want satellites. It cleans its own sky. This is why the Spaceship Moon theory gained traction in the Soviet Union. When you have a celestial body that rings like a bell, acts as a gravity trap, and actively destabilizes orbiters, it's easy to let your imagination run wild. It feels artificial. It feels designed. It feels like a defense mechanism. But the truth is not engineering. It is geology. It is the brutal, unfeeling mechanics of rock and gravity. The defense mechanism is just the uneven distribution of mass caused by random cosmic collisions. The moon is not a machine. It is a corpse. A beautiful, shining corpse that tugs at us, both emotionally and gravitationally. As we stand on the precipice of returning to the moon, with the Artemis missions and beyond, the mascons are once again a problem to be solved. We have better maps now. We have the Grail mission, which mapped the moon's gravity in exquisite detail, revealing the curtain in all its lumpy glory. We know where the weights are now. We can navigate around them. But the mystery of the moon's formation doesn't end with the mascons. We have explained the ringing. We have explained the hidden weights. We have explained the chemical DNA that links it to Earth. Yet, there is one coincidence left. One feature of the moon that cannot be explained by impacts or lava or isotopes. It is a feature that has nothing to do with what the moon is made of, and everything to do with where it is. It is a coincidence so precise, so mathematically improbable, that it has made scientists, philosophers, and dreamers question the nature of reality itself. It is the final piece of the puzzle, the one that turns the moon from a geological curiosity into a cosmic miracle. We have looked inside the moon. Now, we must look at its shadow. The mascons pulled our eyes down to the surface, forcing us to look at the ground to avoid crashing. But if we look up, if we look at the geometry of the sky, we find the greatest enigma of all. It is a numbers game, a ratio, a perfect, impossible fit. The weights in the curtain are heavy, yes, but the curtain itself is hung in exactly the distinct position required to create a spectacle that exists nowhere else in the known universe. The conspiracy theorists look for aliens in the craters. They should have been looking at the eclipse. Because while the moon's gravity is a messy, lumpy minefield, its position in the sky is a masterpiece of precision. And that precision is not just a visual trick. It is the key that unlocked the universe for the human race. The heavy weights of the mascons tell us the moon had a violent past. But the alignment we are about to explore tells us that we, the observers, have a miraculous present. The moon didn't just ring. It didn't just pull. It aligned. And that alignment is where the story becomes truly personal. Because it suggests that the moon isn't just there. It suggests that it is there for us. The ringing was a misunderstanding of physics. The hollow moon was a misunderstanding of density. But the next mystery is not a misunderstanding. It is a hard, cold fact of geometry. And it is the one thing that the skeptics and the believers can both look at and say, that shouldn't be possible. We have survived the gravity wells. We have navigated the minefield. Now, we step into the shadow. The weights are hidden, but the darkness is coming. And in that darkness, the true nature of the moon and our place in the universe will finally be revealed. This is the architecture of the eclipse, and it is perfect. You stand on the surface of the earth, looking up. It is a bright afternoon, the sky a piercing familiar blue. The sun is a blazing tyrant, washing out everything else in the cosmos. It is so dominant, so blindingly bright, that it erases the stars, hides the planets, and commands the rhythm of all life on this sphere. But then, something begins to happen. A shadow creeps across the edge of that blinding disk. The light changes, not fading like a sunset, but graying, flattening into a metallic, eerie twilight. The birds stop singing. The wind drops. The temperature plummets. And then, for a few fleeting minutes, the tyrant is overthrown. A black hole punches through the sky. Where the sun was, there is now a perfect void, surrounded by a gossamer halo of pearlescent light, the solar corona. It is the most beautiful sight in the natural world. It is the total solar eclipse. But we are not here today to talk about beauty. We are here to talk about math. We are here to talk about a number that is so improbable, so statistically absurd, that it has driven astronomers to religion and atheists to madness. That number is 400. If you were to take a measuring tape to the cosmos, you would find that the sun is almost exactly 400 times larger than the moon. It is a gargantuan ball of fusion that could swallow millions of Earths. The moon is a dusty rock that barely covers the United States. They are in completely different weight classes. By all rights, the moon should be a speck against the solar disk, like a transit of Venus, a tiny dot moving across a massive face. But here is the second number. The sun is also, on average, 400 times farther away from Earth than the moon is. 400 times larger. 400 times farther away. When you cancel those numbers out, you are left with a ratio of 1:1. From the surface of our planet, and only from the surface of our planet, the apparent size of the moon and the sun in the sky is identical. They are both perfect circles, occupying about half a degree of visual arc. They fit together like a lock and a key. This is the impossible 400. And it is the reason why, when the hollow moon conspiracy theorists shout that the moon is artificial, that it was placed here, even the most rigid scientists have to pause and take a breath, because this geometry does not exist anywhere else. We have looked. We have surveyed the solar system. Mars has 2 moons, Phobos and Deimos, but they are lumpy captured asteroids that look like potatoes tumbling through the dark. They cannot block the sun. They can only dim it. Jupiter has majestic moons, worlds of ice and fire, but the geometry is wrong. The sun is too small out there, the moon's too close or too far. Earth is unique. We are the owners of the only perfect eclipse in the solar neighborhood. It is a geometric miracle that requires 3 celestial bodies to dent in a line with a precision that defies belief. If the moon were just a few dozen miles smaller, the fit wouldn't be tight enough to reveal the corona. If it were a few dozen miles larger, it would block the corona entirely, hiding the sun's atmosphere. Instead, it is a perfect fit. It blocks the dazzling photosphere exactly, down to the pixel, allowing the faint, ghostly streamers of the sun's upper atmosphere to flare out into the dark. It looks designed. It feels curated. When you see it, you don't feel like you are watching a random orbital mechanic. You feel like you are watching a mechanism, a clockwork gear clicking into place to signal something. But what? To understand the magnitude of this coincidence, we have to look at it through the lens of time. This is where the story shifts from geometry to tragedy. Because this perfect fit, it is temporary. It is a fleeting illusion. We know, thanks to the laser reflectors left behind by the Apollo astronauts, the very same missions that made the moon ring like a bell, that our satellite is leaving us. The moon is stealing energy from Earth's rotation, using it to boost its own orbit. Every single year, the moon drifts about 3.8 centimeters farther away from us. That is roughly the speed at which your fingernails grow. It's a microscopic divorce, happening in slow motion. But deep time turns inches into miles. If you were a dinosaur roaming the Earth during the Cretaceous period, looking up at the sky, you would not have seen a total solar eclipse. You would have seen a moon that looked massive, a hulking giant in the sky that swallowed the sun completely, plunging the world into a deep, dark night, hiding the corona entirely. The fit was too loose. And if you are a human being living 600 million years in the future, you will look up and see a moon that has become too small. It will drift so far away that its apparent size will shrink. It will pass in front of the sun, but it won't be able to cover it. It will create a ring of fire, an annular eclipse, where a bright ring of sunlight remains visible around the edges. The magic of totality will be gone forever. The corona will be lost to the glare. This realization should send a shiver down your spine. Think about the timeline of the universe. It is 14 billion years old. The Earth is 4.5 billion years old. The future of the solar system stretches out for billions of years more. And yet, we, the Homo sapiens, the species with the eyes to see and the minds to wonder, just happen to evolve in the exact tiny sliver of time where the moon and the sun are perfectly matched. We arrived at the exact moment the gears aligned. We are living in the cosmic sweet spot. We are the only eyes that will ever see this glory. Is it luck? Is it chance? Or is it, as the conspiracy theorists suggest, evidence that the environment was tuned for the observer? This is the point where I want you to stop and really wrestle with this. I want to break the fourth wall for a moment, because this is the heartbeat of the mystery. I want you to pause and ask yourself, do you believe in a universe of random chaos, or do you believe in a universe of meaningful coincidence? When you look at the moon, this object that rings like a bell, that is made of the same isotopic flesh as the Earth, and that fits perfectly over the sun, do you feel a sense of cold accident, or do you feel a sense of purpose? Is the impossible 400 just a number, or is it a message? I want you to go down to the comments right now and type one word, chaos or design. Tell me which one you feel in your gut. Whatever you wrote down, hold that thought, because we are about to test it. If the moon was just a pretty light show, we could write this off as a beautiful accident, a cosmic coincidental art project. But it isn't just art. It is a tool. This is the twist that the hollow moon theorists often miss while they are obsessing over alien bases and hollow hulls. They miss the fact that the moon's specific size and distance didn't just give us a show. It gave us the keys to the universe. Turn the clock back to the early 20th century. Physics is in a crisis. For over 200 years, Isaac Newton has reigned supreme. His laws of gravity describe a clockwork universe where space is a fixed stage and time is a constant tick. But a patent clerk named Albert Einstein has just thrown a wrench into the machine. He has proposed a new theory called general relativity. He argues that gravity isn't a force pulling things together. He says it is a curvature of space and time itself. He claims that massive objects, like the sun, warp the fabric of reality around them, creating a valley that other objects roll into. It is a beautiful theory. It is elegant. And in 1915, it is completely unproven. Einstein makes a prediction. He says that if space is curved, then light itself should bend when it passes near a massive object. If you look at a star located directly behind the sun, its light should curve around the sun's gravity well, making the star appear slightly shifted from its true position. But there is a problem, a blinding, burning problem. You cannot see stars next to the sun. The sun is millions of times brighter than the distant stars. To test Einstein's theory, you would need to turn off the sun. You would need to reach up and block out that blinding disk so that the faint starlight grazing its edge could be photographed and measured. You need a shield. You need an occluder. You need something that fits perfectly over the sun, blocking the glare, but leaving the space right next to it visible. You need the impossible 400. If the moon were smaller, the glare would still be there. If the moon were larger, it would block the stars we needed to measure. But because the moon is exactly the size it is, and exactly the distance it is, it creates the perfect laboratory conditions. Enter Sir Arthur Eddington. It is 1919. The world is still bleeding from the trenches of the First World War. Science is fractured by nationalism. But Eddington, a British Quaker and a pacifist, wants to prove the theory of a German physicist. He organizes an expedition to the island of Principe off the coast of Africa, and another to Sobral in Brazil. They are chasing the shadow. They are hunting the eclipse of May to 29th, 1919. Imagine the tension. They have hauled thousands of pounds of glass and brass telescopes through jungles and humidity. They are fighting off mosquitoes and cloud cover. They are waiting for the moon to slide into its slot. And then, it happens. The sky darkens. The impossible 400 clicks into place. The sun vanishes. And there, in the sudden, impossible twilight, the stars appear. Eddington snaps his photographs. He captures the light of the Hyades cluster, passing near the eclipsed sun. When he develops the plates and measures the positions of those stars, he finds that they have moved. They are not where they are supposed to be. They have been shifted by the exact amount Einstein predicted. The light has followed the curve of the moon-made darkness. Newton is overturned. Einstein is vindicated. Our understanding of the universe is fundamentally broken and remade. We realize that space is malleable, that time is flexible, that we live in a curved reality. And we only know this because of the moon. Think about the chain of causality here. If the moon did not exist, or if it were a different size, we might still be living in a Newtonian world. We might not have understood gravity well enough to launch satellites, to build GPS systems, which rely on relativistic corrections, or to understand black holes. The moon acted as a cosmic keyhole. It allowed us to peek through the blinding curtain of the sun and see the machinery of gravity working underneath. This is the true, weirder truth. The conspiracy theorists want the moon to be a spaceship because that makes us feel special. It implies that aliens care about us. But the reality is far more profound. The moon acted as a lens that focused human intelligence. It was a teaching aid. It is almost as if the solar system provided us with the exact instrument we needed, at the exact moment we had the technology to use it. We talked about the ringing in the last chapter. We learned that the ringing proved the moon was solid rock, dry and fractured. That debunked the hollow myth. But now, looking at the eclipse, we see that the hollow moon idea wasn't just wrong about the geology. It was too small in its ambition. A hollow moon is just a base. A spaceship is just a vehicle. but a moon that aligns perfectly with the star of its system to reveal the laws of physics? That is a partner. That is a celestial companion. So, is the moon hollow? No. It is something far more valuable. It is a Rosetta Stone. It is a solid, heavy, cratered, ringing rock that has been drifting away from us for billions of years, waiting for the moment when we would look up, measure the shadow, and realize how the universe works. This brings us back to the mascons, those heavy gravity wells we discussed earlier. The moon is lumpy. It is uneven. It pulls on our spacecraft. It rings when we hit it. It mirrors the sun in the sky. Every single piece of data we have gathered, from the Apollo seismometers to the eclipse photography, paints a picture of an object that is intimately, violently, and perfectly tied to Earth. It is not a stranger. It is not an alien observer. It is part of us. Remember the synestia? That donut of vaporized rock we talked about? The moon formed from the debris of Earth. It is made of our mantle. It is made of our crust. The reason it fits so well in our sky is a mix of chance and dynamics, but the reason it feels so important is that it is, quite literally, our own flesh and blood, hanging in the sky. The impossible 400 is the final nail in the coffin of the conspiracy, but it is the opening act of the romance. We don't need aliens to make the moon interesting. We just need to look at the geometry. As the moon continues its slow drift away from Earth, taking its perfect eclipses with it, we are reminded that nothing in the cosmos is static. We are lucky. We are incredibly, statistically, impossibly lucky to be here right now. The bell rang for us. The shadow fell for us. The stars bent for us. But there is one final layer to this mystery. We have looked at the sound. We have looked at the shadow. Now, we must look at the face. Because the moon doesn't just block the sun, it also refuses to turn around. We have mentioned it in passing, but we have not truly confronted the horror of it. The moon is tidally locked. It spins, but it spins exactly once for every orbit. It keeps one face permanently pointed toward Earth, and one face permanently turned away. For all of human history, until the Soviet Luna 3 probe in 1959, no human eye had ever seen the far side of the moon. Why? Why does it stare at us? The conspiracy theorists say it's because the aliens are hiding their bases on the back. They say the dark side is where the secrets are kept. They are wrong about the aliens, but they are right about the secrets. The far side of the moon is not just a different view. It is a different world. It looks nothing like the face we see. The face we see is covered in dark Maria, the seas of lava. The far side is a battered white highland, scarred by craters, devoid of those dark seas. It looks like a completely different planet. Why did the moon split into two faces? Why is the side facing us scarred with lava, while the side facing the void is pure, thick crust? The answer lies in the heat. The answer lies in the friction. The answer lies in the fact that the Earth didn't just break the moon's rotation. It cooked it. We are about to leave the geometry of the eclipse and descend into the thermodynamics of a tidal lock. We are going to find out why the moon has a man in the moon on one side and a blank stare on the other. And in doing so, we will uncover the final piece of evidence that proves the moon is not a spaceship, but a victim of Earth's gravity. The eclipse showed us the beauty of the alignment. The tidal lock will show us the violence of the bond. You have seen the perfect shadow. Now, prepare to see the hidden face. The impossible 400 opened the keyhole. Now, we are going to step through it and walk on the dark side. Because if you thought the ringing was strange and the eclipse was improbable, Wait until you see what the Earth did to the Moon's spine. The silence of the eclipse is over. The heat is rising. And the story of our celestial partner is about to get much, much darker. This is not just a rock. This is a mirror. And the reflection is cracked. Let's turn it around. If you were to stand on the surface of the Moon and look up at the Earth, you would see a static, unwavering marble hanging in the void. It would never rise, and it would never set. It would simply hang there, a silent witness to the desolation around you. But if you stand here, on the surface of the Earth, and look up at the Moon, you are witnessing the single greatest optical illusion in the universe. It is a trick of perspective, so mathematically precise, so statistically improbable, that it has kept astronomers awake at night for centuries. It is the reason the hollow moon theory, despite being physically impossible, feels emotionally correct. It feels constructed. It feels like a set piece designed for an audience. And the reason for that feeling comes down to a simple, terrifying ratio. The sun is a monster. It is a roaring inferno of nuclear fusion, a ball of plasma so vast that you could fit 1,300,000 Earths inside of it. In terms of diameter, the sun is 400 times larger than our moon. 400 times. If you placed them side by side, the moon would be a speck of dust against a basketball. By all rights, when we look up at the sky, the sun should dominate our vision, and the moon should be nothing more than a minor distraction. But here is the coincidence that breaks the brain. The sun is 400 times larger than the moon, yes, but the sun is also, on average, 400 times farther away from Earth than the moon is. 400 times larger. 400 times farther. The math cancels out perfectly. The geometry is absolute. Because of this impossible ratio, the two objects, one a star that burns with the power of 1 billion hydrogen bombs, the other a cold, dead rock, appear to be exactly the same size in our sky. They are identical disks. This specific alignment allows for the total solar eclipse, a phenomenon that exists almost nowhere else in the known galaxy. When the moon passes in front of the sun, it doesn't just obscure it. It fits over it like a lens cap. It is a perfect block. It covers the blinding photosphere exactly, down to the arc second, allowing the wispy, ethereal corona of the sun to flare out around the edges. If the moon were just a few miles smaller, or a few thousand miles farther away, the fit would be loose. We would see a ring of blinding sunlight, and the corona would remain invisible, drowned out by the glare. If the moon were a few miles larger or closer, it would block everything, swallowing the corona and the spectacle entirely. But it doesn't. It fits. It fits with the precision of a key sliding into a tumbler. This is the fuel for the conspiracy. When you look at that perfect fit, it is hard not to feel a shiver of paranoia. It looks like intelligent design. It looks like a mechanism. And in a way, it is a mechanism, but not an alien one. It is a mechanism of history. This perfect alignment isn't just a pretty light show. It is the tool that allowed us to unlock the structure of the universe itself. Without this coincidence, we might still be living in the dark ages of physics. To understand why, we have to go back to May 29, 1919. At that time, the world of science was in the middle of a civil war. Isaac Newton's laws of gravity had ruled for 200 years. They were the bedrock of reality. But a patent clerk named Albert Einstein had just proposed a new theory called general relativity. He argued that gravity wasn't a force pulling things together, but a curvature in the fabric of space and time. He claimed that massive objects like the sun would bend the space around them, and that even light itself would have to follow that curve. It was a radical, insane idea, and it was impossible to prove. To prove it, you would need to see starlight bending as it passed near the sun. But you can't see stars during the day. The sun is too bright. It blinds everything near it. Einstein's theory was trapped on paper, destined to be a mathematical curiosity, because there was no way to turn off the sun. Except, of course, for the moon. Sir Arthur Eddington, a British astronomer, realized that the moon's impossible geometry offered a fleeting opportunity. He knew that during a total solar eclipse, the moon would act as the perfect shield. It would block the glare of the sun's disk, but because the fit was so precise, it would leave the space immediately around the sun visible. It would turn day into twilight for just a few minutes, revealing the stars of the Hyades cluster right next to the darkened sun. Eddington traveled to the island of Principe, off the coast of Africa. He set up his telescopes and waited for the moon to slide into place. As the shadow swept over him and the moon locked into that 400-to-1 ratio, the sky went dark. The stars appeared. Eddington took his photographs. When he analyzed the plates, he found exactly what Einstein had predicted. The stars were not where they were supposed to be. Their light had been bent by the sun's gravity, curving around the massive star before reaching Earth. The moon had acted as a thumb over a flashlight, allowing humanity to see the fireflies dancing around the bulb. Think about the implications of this. If the moon had been 10% smaller, the glare would have persisted. Eddington's experiment would have failed. Einstein's theory might have languished for decades, unproven. Our understanding of black holes, the Big Bang, and the GPS satellites that guide your car today, all of which rely on relativity, would have been delayed or denied. We owe our modern understanding of reality to a geometric coincidence. We used the moon as a piece of scientific equipment. It was a lens provided by the cosmos, calibrated to the exact specifications we needed to see the truth. But this gift comes with an expiration date. And this is where the story shifts from the mechanical to the existential. The conspiracy theorists who say the moon is hollow are trying to find a mystery in the wrong place. They want the mystery to be inside the moon. But the true mystery is in the timeline. The perfect fit of the eclipse is not a permanent feature of the Earth-Moon system. It is a fleeting window, a temporary glitch in the system. The moon is leaving us. Every single year, the moon drifts approximately 3.8 centimeters farther away from Earth. It is roughly the speed at which your fingernails grow. It seems negligible. If you watched the moon for a human lifetime, you would never notice the change. But the solar system does not operate on human lifetimes. It operates on deep time. And over the course of billions of years, those centimeters add up to thousands of miles. This drift is caused by the very tides that the moon creates. As the moon's gravity pulls on the Earth's oceans, it creates a tidal bulge, a massive wave of water that travels across the planet. But because the Earth rotates much faster than the moon orbits, that tidal bulge is constantly being dragged ahead of the moon. This creates a gravitational torque. The bulge of water on Earth pulls the moon forward, injecting energy into its orbit. It is a cosmic trade-off. The Earth is losing energy, slowing down its rotation, which is why our days are getting longer, by a fraction of a second every century. And the moon is gaining that energy, using it to fling itself higher and higher into the void, spiraling outward like a stone in a sling. This means that in the distant past, the moon was much, much closer. When it first formed from the debris of Theia, it was a looming terror in the sky, appearing 15 times larger than it does today. It would have eclipsed the sun entirely, plunging the world into deep, prolonged darkness. If you were a dinosaur looking up during the Jurassic period, you would not have seen the delicate pearl-white corona during an eclipse. You would have seen a massive black hole in the sky, that swallowed the sun and the stars alike. The balance hadn't been struck yet, and in the future, the balance will be lost. Calculations show that in approximately 600 million years, the moon will have drifted far enough away that its apparent size will be too small to cover the sun completely. The era of the total solar eclipse will end forever. Future observers standing on Earth, if there are any, will look up during an eclipse and see only a ring of fire, an annular eclipse where the sun forms a bright halo around the dark moon. The corona will be lost to the glare. The stars will remain hidden. The sky will never go fully dark during the day again. This realization is what chills me to the bone. It is far more profound than any story about alien bases or hollow metal shells. Consider the timeline of the universe. It spans nearly 14 billion years. The Earth has existed for 4.5 billion years. And yet, we, Homo sapiens, have arrived at the exact precise moment in that timeline where the moon and the sun appear identical in the sky. We exist in the Goldilocks zone of time. If we had evolved 100 million years earlier, the moon would have been too big. If we had evolved 1 billion years later, the moon would be too small. We are living in the brief, flickering window where the geometry is perfect. We are the only eyes that will ever see this. We are the only minds that will ever be able to use this alignment to prove the laws of gravity. Is it any wonder that we worshipped it? Is it any wonder that we built stone circles to track it? Is it any wonder that, when we look at that black disk rimmed in fire, we feel a sense of profound, vibrating significance? The hollow moon theory tries to explain this significance by inventing a builder. It assumes that if something is perfect, it must be artificial. It assumes that coincidence is impossible. But the reality is that we are the winners of a cosmic lottery. We are the beneficiaries of a temporary arrangement between a dying star, a cooling rock, and a drifting satellite. This changes the way you look at the moon. It is not a static object. It is a frame of film in a movie that is running at super slow motion. When you look up tonight, you are not seeing a painting. You are seeing a snapshot of a process. You are watching a slow motion breakup. The moon is waving goodbye. It has been waving goodbye since the moment it was born, drifting away from the parent that created it, inch by inch, centimeter by centimeter. And this brings us back to the ringing. Remember the Apollo 12 mission. Remember the bell. The conspiracy theorists heard the moon ring for an hour and concluded it was a metal shell. We now know it rang because it is dry, rigid, and fractured. A solid stone scarred by billions of years of cosmic violence. But there is a poetic truth to the ringing. A bell rings to mark time. A bell rings to signal a transition. The moon is a bell. It is tolling the passage of an epoch. It is marking the specific, unique era of intelligent life on Earth. It is telling us that we are here, right now, in the only moment that matters. The ringing isn't the sound of a hollow hull. It is the resonance of a temporary harmony. We often feel insignificant when we look at the stars. We feel small against the scale of the universe. But this fleeting window suggests something else. It suggests that our perspective is privileged. We are not just random observers. We are the necessary observers. The universe has arranged itself into a spectacle that only we can appreciate, and only we can understand. The moon shaped us. As we discussed, its gravity stabilized the Earth's wobble. Without the moon, the Earth would tumble on its axis, causing catastrophic climate shifts that would make complex life impossible. We wouldn't be here to see the eclipse if the moon hadn't been there to steady our cradle. It gave us our tides, which may have pulled life from the oceans onto the land. It gave us our rhythm, the monthly cycle, that is biologically hardwired into almost every species on Earth. And then, as a final graduation gift, it aligned itself perfectly with the sun to teach us how gravity works. It is the ultimate partner, and like all partners, it is growing distant. So, is the moon hollow? No. It is dense, heavy, and real. It is made of the same stuff as the Earth, the same oxygen, the same silicon, the same isotopic blood. It is a piece of us that was ripped away in fire, coalesced in orbit, and has been watching over us ever since. But the fact that it isn't hollow doesn't make it mundane. It makes it precious. A hollow moon would be a curiosity, a piece of alien engineering to be dissected and studied. A solid, drifting, eclipsing moon is a tragedy. It is a story of connection and separation. It is a reminder that everything in this universe, even the rocks in the sky, is in a state of flux. Nothing stays, nothing holds. The perfect alignment we see today is a momentary pause in a relentless drift toward isolation. We are lucky. That is the scientific term for it. We are statistically, improbably, heartbreakingly lucky. We have a front row seat to the greatest show in the galaxy, and we arrived just before the curtain closes. This journey started with a question about a conspiracy. We asked if the moon was a spaceship. We found out it was a planetary shrapnel. We asked if it was hollow. We found out it was a dry, ringing crystal. We asked if it was artificial. We found out it was a natural clock, ticking down a timescale we can barely comprehend. The moon is not a lie. It is a mirror. And when we look into it, we don't see aliens. We see our own fragility. We see the delicate, improbable conditions that allow us to exist. We see that we are standing on a moving platform, looking at a moving target, in a universe that is constantly rushing apart. The mystery isn't why the moon rings. The mystery is why we are here to hear it. As we close this chapter, I want you to walk outside tonight. I want you to find the moon in the sky. It might be a crescent. It might be full. It might be a gibbous. Look at it. Really look at it. Don't just see the white shape you've seen 1,000 times. See the three-dimensional sphere hanging in the blackness. See the scars of the craters. See the dark seas where the lava pooled. And then, try to feel the motion. Try to feel the 3.8 centimeters. Try to feel the silence of the vacuum between you and it. We have debunked the myth, but we have uncovered a reality that is far stranger. The moon is a ghost of the Earth, a child of a collision, a stabilizer of life, and a drifting timekeeper. It is the only reason we know how the universe works. And one day, it will be too far away to care. But for now, it is here. For now, the fit is perfect. For now, the eclipse holds. You are living in the window. You are the witness. Do you believe that this is all just a coincidence? That the 400-to-1 ratio, the stabilization of life, and the perfect timing of humanity's arrival are just random rolls of the cosmic dice? Or does the sheer weight of these improbabilities make you feel that perhaps, just perhaps, the universe is waiting to be observed? I want to know what you feel when you look up. Does the perfect eclipse make you feel small, or does it make you feel chosen? Tell me in the comments below. I read every single theory, every single thought. If you want to continue this journey, if you want to peel back the layers of the solar system and find the weird beating heart underneath, then click that subscribe button. Join us. We are investigating the universe one enigma at a time, and we need your eyes on the data. The moon is drifting, but we are just getting started. I'll see you in the dark.